Is there, Bill Shorten, any question that Julia Gillard will be Prime Minister heading into the election?
No.
Will you review your support for her?
No.
Have you been asked to?
No.
Is this a total invention, this leadership issue?
Listen, the leadership debate comes up in the context that Labor's doing it hard at the moment in the polls. People want to make sure, Labor voters want to make sure that Labor is as competitive as it can be at the election. And what I would say to Labor voters listening, and indeed Conservative voters who still want to see a strong opposition and a strong government and a strong debate in Australia, the government led by Julia Gillard and the Labor Party generally is focused on jobs and growth. We have a plan for jobs and growth. We want to see the schools in Australia provide better outcomes for our kids. We want to make sure that the National Disability Insurance Scheme succeeds. We want to make sure that there's no 15% tax paid by low-income earners on their superannuation. So we want this election to be about ideas, not just personalities.
You know the way words are analysed at times like this. Do you totally and unequivocally support Julia Gillard as Prime Minister until the election?
I support the Prime Minister. I know what the leadership speculation's about, but what I also know is that what Australians want, and I think you said it as I was listening to your show as you're coming in. If you didn't say it exactly like this, I apologise. But the people have had a bit of a gutful about just politics and they just want to get on with the issues. There are big issues in Melbourne today right now. There's the issue of are our schools providing the right outcomes for our kids? Are our roads congested and clogged up? Will people have enough money to retire on? People want us to get on with the issues, not the personalities.
Do you unequivocally and totally support this Prime Minister into the next election?
I do support this Prime Minister, and you know that words are important, so that is why I'm saying I support our Prime Minister. What I also know is I support our Prime Minister because it's only Labor who's got a plan for the future. The opposition's got a small target strategy. I mean, they've now gone off on a frolic about Northern Australia. I'm interested in what happens in North Sunshine, North Essendon and North Frankston.
I'd like to get to Northern Australia in the moment. So that support from you is unequivocal until the next election?
I continue to support the Prime Minister. And the reason why I continue to support our Prime Minister Gillard, is because the issues that she's talking about are the issues which matter to Australians. What matters to Australians is ultimately not even Liberal or Labor. What matters to Australians is, are their kids getting a good education? Are the schools that they're in working properly? Do they have the adequate resources? What matters to Australians is, will they have enough money to retire upon? There are issues out there that matter beyond personalities. Personalities is easy and interesting and fun to talk about, but what really matters is what sort of world are we creating for our kids.
But it's not just us that's talking about it, it's the whole caucus, as you know, and you still haven't said whether you support her until the next election.
I continue to support our Prime Minister, full stop. I continue to support our Prime Minister,
Will you
full
guarantee
stop.
that support until the next election?
I will continue to support our Prime Minister, yes.
You will continue to support
Neil,
her?
you want to talk about...
No, you haven't given me the
Sorry,
guarantee.
I continue to support our Prime Minister, yes.
Will you guarantee...
Black and white, yes, I continue to support our Prime Minister. And Neil,
do you guarantee
at some
that
point,
until the next
well, Neil,
election?
I've answered your question.
No, you haven't, with respect,
sorry. Well, when you say with respect, I'm not sure you do mean that.
Okay, well,
so
without
words
respect,
are important.
Without
okay,
respect,
well,
you
say words
guarantee support until the next election?
You want to keep talking about leadership? I support our Prime Minister. But what I also know is I want to talk about the issues in Australia beyond it. The Libs love the fact that you spend your time and that we all spend our time talking about leadership.
I'm not Kevin Rudd.
Well, no, I can tell that.
Have you spoken to Kevin
Rudd
about
with that.
this?
I haven't spoken to Kevin Rudd about the leadership. I do speak to all of our caucus colleagues. But what I also know is that what Australia wants is a debate about the issues. While we sit here and you ask questions about the leadership, you're letting the Liberals off scot-free. They haven't got costed promises. You know that. You know that the Liberal policies they haven't thought through. Why is it that this interview, we've been doing this interview for 6 minutes.
Do you deny there is turmoil in your party?
I agree that there is concern about the performance of the Labor Party. Yes, I do. But what I also know is that there's concern about what will happen if Tony Abbott becomes the Prime Minister of Australia. And we've got to stop allowing the Liberals, and I agree that leadership discussion does distract. But what I also know is that the Liberal Party don't have costed policies about a whole lot of stuff. They want to put on, and I'm never going to give up on this argument, they have got a plan to put a 15% tax on the superannuation contributions of every Australian who earns less than $37,000. That's 1.5 times the GST on 3.5 million people. Where on earth will we ever get the analysis, the fact the Liberal Party of Australia want to put a new tax on people's superannuation.
Do you believe there will be a leadership ballot next week?
No.
Do you believe there will be a leadership ballot before the election?
No. But I do believe that unless the Liberal Party get a proper examination of their policies, then Australian politics is being let down by people who should be examining two sides of this political race.
Do you believe Kevin Rudd should pull his head in?
Kevin Rudd's campaigning for Labor. I'm not going to start bagging individuals. What I also know is that there's two horses in this race, and I also know that only the Liberal Party wants to put a tax on 3.5 million Australians on their superannuation. We know, for instance, there's a gender savings gap, or in plain English, women have less money when they retire than men. Now, people aren't going anywhere once they retire, and if we don't increase superannuation, well, then the taxes will go up to pay for the age pension. Why is it that no one is debating the fact that the Liberal Party want to put a tax on 3.5 million Australians? Why is this not talked about?
Have you been frozen out of the decision-making
No.
by the Prime Minister?
No.
Are you on good terms with her?
Yes.
Does she still take your advice?
She takes advice from all sorts of quarters. Sometimes she takes my advice.
Have you advised her on the issue of leadership?
No.
Will you?
In terms of what, Neil?
In terms of what is going on within your party, Minister?
Well, what I'm talking about, and even if the media won't, I tell you what, Neil, even if the media won't talk about the Liberal Party and their lack of policies and their new tax on superannuation, I will.
What is your party talking about behind closed doors, do you think?
Why the Liberal Party want to put a 15% tax? 15%
Are you
tax.
serious? You don't believe that your party is obsessed by the leadership?
I'll tell you what, Neil, I know that some people are obsessed by the leadership. I'm obsessed by the fact that not enough Australians have enough to retire on. I'm obsessed by the fact that no matter what Labor says, we can't seem to get anyone interested in the fact that there's a 15% tax on 3.5 million
And
Australians.
whose fault do you think that could be, Minister?
Well, let's be clear. That's partly the Labor Party's fault. But how come there hasn't been an analysis of the Liberal Party's great big new tax on 3.5 million Australians? I tell you what, if Julia Gillard said she was going to do that, people would go crazy. They'd be dropping out of trees like koalas on LSD. They'd be going nuts. But when it's the Liberals or the Coalition proposing a 15% tax on superannuation, not a whisper.
You had enough of it, Bill. Bill Shorten, you're getting a bit hassled by all this, aren't you? You're
Neil,
sick of it all. You're sick of it.
Neil, what I say is that I know that the Libs have got a small target strategy where they've got 4-word slogans and a lack of detail.
He keeps talking about the Libs, doesn't he? I think he's infatuated. There's something cosmic going on.
No, because I actually don't think that you controlling the Senate's a great thing for Australian
But
democracy.
you must be frustrated by your own lot that are tearing themselves apart.
It is frustrating when Labor can't talk about the issues that are important because it's all about ourselves. But what I also know is that this is an election where there's two horses in the race, plus the Palmer United Party and everyone else. What I think is that I'm interested in who's got the best policies on schools, on disability, on superannuation,
but you
on
also,
jobs.
You also told me 2 weeks ago if the polls are right, you'd get whipped. Now, the polls are even worse, aren't they?
Yes.
You're going to get whipped?
Well, we haven't given up. And what I want to say to Labor voters is that the Labor Party has not given up. We think that as the election draws close, when there's an examination not just on personalities but on ideas, I want every parent of a child in my electorate to get a Labor government back because I want every child in my electorate to get more resources in their schools. A vote for the Liberals is a vote for the status quo. A vote for Labor is better support in our schools for our kids. There's nothing more important.